Good morning. Welcome to Skills Sustaining Your Practice, and welcome to our first session for this year, the Hustle Funding Your Practice. My name is Michelle Lisa Paul-Saint. I am the Education and Community Engagement Manager here at Untitled Arts, and I'm so excited to have you join me today. So today's session, the hustle, is really, we want to just preface by saying we don't really believe in the idea of hustle culture, but we do want to encourage artists to define what the hustle can look like for themselves. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today is identifying what works for you and what you need in order to make these decisions on your financial goals for your artistic practice. And joining me today to talk about this kind of nebulous, complicated work that we do as artists are Juan Matos and Amanda Bradley, my coworkers at Untitled Arts. Juan Matos is our digital content creator and digital content coordinator and producer, and Amanda Bradley is our exhibitions and programs manager. Both Juancy and Amanda are visual artists in their own right. Amanda is a photographer who's shown her work nationally, and has been awarded for her work. And Juan Matos is also a award-winning filmmaker and photographer himself. Just one made in Miami at MIF. I'm gonna shout that out at least for the next 6 months, I think. So do you guys want to say hello?
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, what's up? Feel free to let us know where you're coming from in the chat and just say what's up.
And I'm also about to put a document in the chat that you all can reference while we're going through this. The public document is for view only, so you can't edit it. So if you want to add stuff to it yourself, you can go ahead and make a copy. Hi, Alette. And so I'm going to post this in the chat now. Is there a way to pin it? No, there's not a way to pin it. Okay, so we're just going to post it in the chat. And I think we can go ahead and get started if everybody's cool.
Yeah, and I think as we go through the presentation, guys, you can feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. We'll keep an eye on them to see if we should answer them throughout the presentation or if we wait till the end. So just send us anything you got.
Yeah, we do prefer the Q&A feature so we can keep track of what we actually answered. But I will also be monitoring the chat just in case. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Full screen first.
We got some international folks in the chat.
Do we?
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, Lima, Mexico. We've got North Miami. That's North Miami.
Pretty far.
Let me try it this again because my share screen is being also. Okay. All right. So the hustle, funding your practice. Let's do it.
All right, so what is the hustle? This is our definition, and as we go through the presentation, I think you all will see that this is really just an intentional effort. So the hustle is the act of making an intentional effort, decision, and sacrifice towards the goal of creating sustainability for your practice, life, and future endeavors. I would say the key to our definition is the word intentional. Thinking about how you fund a practice or how you sustain yourself, you want to make sure that all the decisions that you're making always have purpose and intention behind them. So in this presentation, we're going to go through some of the things to consider, like your needs, your goals, what steps you can take, how to balance all aspects of your life, being your needs, your life, your practice, your goals. We'll go through some case studies that we, kind of did a behind the scenes look at what artists in Miami are doing to fund their practice. We'll share with you some resources, and then of course we'll chat with you all and go through your questions.
Yeah. Cool. So pretty much the first step in figuring out how to go about this is just understanding what it is that you really need, what it is that you really want for yourself and for your future and for your practice. So, obviously in your artistic practice, you need to figure out what actually physically you need to make the work that you want to make? You know, do you need a studio space? Do you need certain types of materials? Do you really just need time to just like sit down, you know, and think about things, or to develop something? Do you need a lot of money to fabricate works? Do you need help? Do you need community? Do you need dialogue, and labor, of course, as well? And then, of course, artistic practice is not separate from our lives. So we also have to figure out, yes, we also need to find motivation and inspiration for the work. And in life, we need to figure out how to just like find, healthy ways of living. We need housing, we need to be able to eat healthy and well, we need to be able to move around. And we also need to take care of our physical, mental, spiritual health. Those are all things that are super important, and that is not, distinct from having a healthy and fulfilling artistic practice.
And then the next step would be thinking about your goals, whether they be short-term, long-term, or in the moment. So for your practice, where do you really want your work and your practice to take you? Is it exhibitions? Is it permanent public art projects? Do you want your work to be collected by a museum or a private collector? Do you want to start your own business and have kind of this working studio? Is it selling your art, commissions, awards, residencies? I think these are, just a sampling of the opportunities that an art practice can offer, but it can be overwhelming if you're looking at them, on this large scale. And then also thinking about balancing your life with that. So what are your big life goals? Do you want to own a home? Can you afford rent? Do you want to live where you live? Do you want to travel? Do you want to have a family? How do you save to retire? Do you have your own, day job business outside of your artistic practice? Do you want to go to grad school? So these are all things to kind of think about in tandem with what your needs are. And I think the next steps and the next things we'll take you through are really figuring out how to balance always having intentionality between your needs and your goals.
Yeah, and none of these lists, either of these lists are not complete. There's definitely things that we probably didn't think about in our conversations in prepping for this. Or there are things that are very specific to your practice in your life that you desire. But these are kind of like the general things that might come up and you might desire out of your practice and your life goals.
Yeah, so then, pretty much everybody needs to find a way to fund their work, Are you thinking about grants? Are you thinking about private funders? Is it easier for you to be at residencies and just have time to develop your work through that? Of course, the sale of your work. And then, are you working part-time? Do you work full-time like we all do here? Do you also do freelance work like we all do here? And those are just some traditional funding sources, but also people, find support for their work through help from their peers and in-kind donations, through collaborative practices and works, through crowdfunding, trading, and of course, just using your relationships and network to find ways to be able to develop the practice and the work that you want in the ways that you need to. Maybe I've done work for people where, I'll do a video for them, and in turn I'll receive a painting or, a piece of jewelry or whatever it is. So it's also just acknowledging, like, what are you good at? What can you do? And how can you use your skills if maybe you don't have the funds to get the things that you want? How to use your skills to get those things.
Yeah, and in the process of finding these funding sources, you should always be thinking about the goals and thinking about whether or not it contributes to one of your life goals or your artistic practice goals. So kind of using those goals and always constantly looking back at them and saying, is this contributing to that? So oftentimes that might mean, if, like, for me, for example, I'm not sure if home ownership is something I desire yet. I know that people scoff at the idea of that I don't really know if I want to own a home. But so for me, I might do more trading than other people would, because I don't really need to have cash in hand, because I know I can't trade a painting for a down payment to the bank. But if you're somebody who does desire to own a home, maybe trading often might not work best for you. So just using your financial and your life goals as kind of like your, not to say home because it sounds so silly, but like, yeah, like kind of go back to that as like a reference point for everything that you're doing moving forward, and making sure there's a balance between the monetary and the non-monetary ways that you are funding your practice as needed.
I also think that, you know, in this slide, we show them as two separate kind of entities, but a lot of times the traditional and alternate funding sources go hand in hand. Like, for example, grants often ask if you have in-kind donations that offset matching. You know, artwork sales, like Michelle said, artists do trades all the time. That's still an asset for you. Thinking about how to collaborate on grants, how to collaborate. So I think that, you know, we show them as separate entities because I think we understand them as one is bringing in actual funds and the other is bringing in some sort of support. But oftentimes they kind of work in an echo of each other.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And I do want to just define in-kind donations. I feel like that always is a question. I think it's such a grant word to say in-kind donations that sometimes I forget that it's not like a commonplace like thing to talk about. But essentially, in-kind donations are any thing that is given to you for a project or for a performance or anything like that, that wouldn't typically have a cost, but is being given to you without a cost. So you know, donations oftentimes, you know, like this isn't like getting like t-shirts and things like that, but it's like, for example, space use. Like if somebody typically rents their space for 10 grand and gives it to you for free, that does have a monetary number attached to it. And oftentimes when you are applying for certain grants that require matching for artists or for smaller organizations, they might ask you, they might allow you to match that with in-kind donations. So that instead of having to say you have an extra 10 grand or 20 grand from another organization or from a private funder or crowdfunding or your own funds, you can say, I don't have matching funds, but I do have this like list of things that I got in kind from someone. I always want to like clarify and reiterate that one because it is a way that a lot of artists can secure funding for themselves and support their other funding without realizing it. And it's not like as like, I guess, cumbersome or time consuming as say finding collaborators or crowdfunding or things like that.
Yeah, I also just want to add, like, you know, this list is this is about funding your practice, but I think a lot of these things are also about building community. And I think, you know, I don't want it to only seem like it's like, you know, this is just about making money and like, how do I do what I want to do? It's also about like, you know, having friends and having dialogue. And you can do that through residencies, you can do that through your work, through freelance work, through trading, you know, so it's also just about building connections and having like healthy, sometimes non-capitalistic perspectives of how you practice.
Yeah.
All right, so echoing what Juan just said, going down the route of if you're trying to find work that will provide some sort of funding or access for your practice, I would suggest looking at your needs and your goals, and what are some of the things you can benefit from learning, doing, or investing in that can also support your practice. So example one, my practice involves video performance and sound, and I'm always looking for people to work with on projects. One thing could be applying to work at a theater, production company, or on a film set, not only to get funds, but also, like Juan said, to meet people who are like-minded individuals who either have access to equipment, understand what you're trying to build, would be interesting to collaborate with. Another thing could be participating in local meetups with other artists in your field. I think all three of us are huge proponents for artist communities and relationships. I think, you know, it's kind of hard to say that like money isn't everything, but money is really not everything. I think a lot of times community can bring in a lot for you. So if you haven't, you know, gone out to open studios in town or exhibition openings where you are exposed to other artists who are thinking like you or who are struggling with the same things, I highly suggest you do that. A lot of artists, I think, especially in Miami, are meeting up monthly to talk about work or to do crits. And then another thing you could do is, signing up for newsletters of organizations that support work in your field. That's something that we'll share with you guys in the resources, but I think email lists are super important. There's a ton of organizations that are sending out opportunities bi-weekly and monthly that really are where you can find funds or access to residencies and these different things that you'll need. Juan, do you want to do the next one?
I'll also just say, like, don't underestimate any of those kinds of things. Like, sometimes I feel like we hear people saying like, oh, like, I feel like there's no opportunities, like there's no whatever it is that I need. It's like sometimes you have to put a lot of like intentional work into finding it, and there's a lot of resources, I think, and I'm excited to send that out at the end. And also a big star, asterisk, if you're taking notes, just put a big star next to the community part of this, because that's essential. Example 2 is my practice requires access, let me move this, sorry, to various art making spaces and time to develop works. So something that you can do if you just need time and need space is apprentice with other artists and makers. There's a lot of full-time artists everywhere and they always need help. You can apply to a residency program that has art making facilities. Miami doesn't have a lot of maker spaces, and residency programs can really provide like serious help, not only just with like the space itself and the workshops that they have, but also with the people that work there and the knowledge that those people have to like assist you in developing your practice. And then the last thing, is finding ways to work with lab techs or people at maker spaces.
Yeah, I just want to echo, that first point about apprenticing with other artists. I can speak from firsthand experience. I've worked with a bunch of different artists in various fields, not only in mine, and I've learned so much, but also thinking about your reach. It really extends beyond the city that you're in. So, if you're working with an artist in New York or you're working with an artist in Miami, but their gallery is in Europe or around the country, you're automatically expanding your reach as an artist because you're making connections via email, via phone call, via projects. If you're traveling to help them install a show, I cannot advocate enough for learning from other peers. I've done it throughout school and throughout my career as an artist. And to me, I don't think that it's ever going to be beneath me to assist someone else. It's just such a great thing, I think, to have a mentor and to have a peer who truly cares about you and that you can have these intentional conversations with. And they have probably struggled with the exact same thing that you are struggling with now. So it's really great to have kind of this sounding board to go back to at the end of the day. Yeah.
And again, those are relationships that you make when you show up, and you show up to openings and you show up to open studios. And you show up not as somebody who's there to only take resources from others, but also contribute and to be in dialogue.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting because I think we all work full-time jobs. Like obviously the three of us work full-time jobs at the same place, but I've personally worked in arts administration for about now like 8 or 9 years, and in doing so, I've learned more about my personal practice as well, and met a lot of my own collaborators in doing so as well. Like one of my main collaborators, Naja Moon, I met her because she essentially was the only person who showed up to a grant workshop in North Miami, and she showed up. And then there was this like, long drawn out situation where we tried to find a way for me to show her the presentation. And eventually I just was like, do you want to come to my house to have a big screen TV? And so I stood in my living room and presented this presentation about the grant to her. And in that conversation, we started talking about our own practices and what we're interested in doing. And by 4 months later, we executed our first project together. And fast forward to now, we've done so many other things together. And it happened very naturally, but had I not been in the space to do that, I don't really know if we might have met, of course, but I don't know if we would have ended up in the situation now where we're in the same studio space, where we've met so many people and we've traveled to different cities together on our projects. And that stuff is like, that kind of connection and engagement with other artists is invaluable. So definitely the work, and that's one of the benefits of working, like having a job that also is part of the field. And as much as it can be really hard to balance both, there are so many benefits to it at the same time.
100%. Yeah, I'll also just briefly speak to my experience with that is working at ULED. I was able to go to one of these residencies with a bunch of Miami artists, and that's where I met architect Jermaine Barnes,
Oh,
and we
nice.
made a film together, and now it's touring festivals and winning prizes. And there's so many relationships that I built just because of my opportunity. I don't mean to be like, it's kind of lame sometimes to say these things, but it's also to be
No,
like
it's
real.
fine.
Like this work has really put me in connection with people.
Yeah.
And so it's
Oh, is
also
that your film? Is that your film that one night made in Miami this year?
yeah.
Oh, right,
That's
right.
I met Jermaine at ACA.
I didn't realize that. That's really
Yeah,
cool. That's awesome.
yeah, it's
Wow.
wild.
All right, time management and boundaries. This is the key to any successful hustle or any successful life, I would say. Number one, you have to understand the value of your time. I think it's really, really easy to feel overwhelmed and to know that you need X amount of dollars at the end of the week for this and that bill. So I go back to that original slide where we talked about like intentional efforts, choices, and sacrifice. It's always about this balance of understanding what it is you need, what it is you want, and what the value in everything is. So what is each of your time investments bringing in as a return, whether that be, in the previous examples, working at a theater so you can meet people or have access for a project, whether that be a day job in the arts where you're able to build community like Juan, Michelle, and I do daily, or whether that be a grant application or a long-term grant project. So always going back to those needs and wants and kind of balancing the value. How do you set boundaries for yourself to keep your hustle balanced? Like I said, always look back, always have those lists for yourself as to what your goals are. I would also suggest separating them into short-term and long-term goals. I typically try to set yearly goals for my artistic practice and also my life, but then I also set, have these kind of monthly check-in lists where I'm like, what have I done this month? How have I moved closer to my end of 2022 goal? So lists is a big thing, keeping a notebook, kind of keeping yourself in check in that sense and keeping yourself accountable. Also community, they're great at keeping you accountable. Your friends will always check you because they don't want to hear you complain about not moving yourself forward if you're not doing the right things to get there. And then if you're not using a calendar, this is the time. I think if you take anything away from this presentation, it's time management is the key. Everyone thinks that money is everything, but all we get in this world is time. So really investing your time in the right spaces, use your calendar as your tool, whether it's on your phone, in your email, whether it's written. I know I have a written agenda, I have a Gmail calendar, I have another calendar app. I think however you need to separate it out, put everything on your calendar, keep yourself accountable, set reminders for yourself to check in on your mental health, to check in on, have you drank enough water today? Have you read? Have you set aside time to learn something new? Have you submitted something that is due? So it's okay to set these kind of daily or weekly reminders for yourself. And even if you can't get to it that day, that reminder is going to trigger kind of this keeping yourself in check. So calendars are absolutely necessary.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I want to, so it's like, I think it's like, it's also like just identifying what works best for you, right? I know a lot of people like written agendas, but I lose those things all the time. And I also like am not a fan of like of mess and like a lot of things. And so when I have a lot of things around me, it makes me very kind of stressed. So personally, I put everything in my phone. And I'm one of those people whose phone is always on 100%. So like my phone's always charged because I know I always need it. And so I use like Google Keep. Google Keep is one of my favorite apps to use for managing my time. It essentially like I set a reminder on my to-do list every day at noon, and it pops up at noon, and I just go through my to-do list to see where I'm at. And there's things that have been on the to-do list for months because they're things that take time, but it reminds me every day to like check back on that. Like I'm jurying some prizes right now. On there is like jury that thing, and once I've finished all of my reading, I will mark that as done. And I think, and it might feel kind of silly to talk so much about time management in a conversation that's about money, essentially, but your time is valuable. Like I mean, genuinely, like it costs money for you to exist in this world. Therefore, it feels weird to assign a number to your hours in a day, but it does. Like there is a number to those hours in a day. So this is also partially about making sure you're contributing to your own time, but also knowing which projects are worth your time. And so if you can identify like, okay, like I have this number of hours per day to like actually work, if I consider my time for sleep, leisure, and sustenance, then like this is important for me to scale back on doing things. And it, you know, and it always goes back to like also being able to say no when you don't have the time. Like I think that I've had to burn out 3 times in order for myself to be able to be like, you should start just saying no when you can't do things. I've been like this since I was in like a high schooler, and it's very common for people to just like continue these particular cycles with themselves. But learning to be able to be like, no, actually, I genuinely can't add to my plate is a big part of the time management process. They go completely hand in hand.
And I think
Boundaries.
Yeah,
Boundaries.
yeah, just to echo that, it's like never give someone an automatic yes. I know
Mm.
there's probably some people listening who are like, but never give someone an automatic yes. Take the time you need to actually assess if it's something you can commit to. And we'll touch on that a little bit later as we get through the presentation, but like, you know, don't bite yourself in the foot. Really assess what it is your investment is and how it's, you know, how it's contributing to you before you commit to someone else.
Yeah, you really want to set yourself up for success, you know, and if you're jumping to every opportunity and you're not actually aware of like the actual cost of your time and your mental health and your physical well-being, and then you come out doing it bad, then it just is a bad look on you, you know. So just set yourself up to do the best that you can, and sometimes that means saying no.
100%. Even when it hurts to say no.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes, for sure. How to ask for what you need. Wow. This is a profound, it's a really profound title.
So this one is, I will say, this is the thing that I will fight tooth and nail with every artist about every day, because, and maybe it's also partially because I've been on the inside and I recognize like, if the institution is asking you to do something, or like a group of people is asking you, that means that they understand there's a value to it. Whether they want to pay you for that value or not, that's not for you to really like decide for them, but you have to decide for yourself. I think going back to boundaries, something I feel like for a long time has been, it's boundaries sounded kind of like telling someone how you need them to behave towards you, when really it's about when you decide that you're not going to take certain behaviors from people. And so with institutions and groups and people asking you for things, you kind of have to treat them like a relationship, because it is a relationship. There's an exchange of emotions, feelings, thoughts that are happening here. So it's really important not to waste any time with talking about budgets. Ask about it up front. And I say that like not to be like, some people might see you as like greedy or try to gaslight you into thinking you're like too focused on funding, but everything we do has a value. Everything we do costs money, and it's not fair. And I know a lot of artists experience this where they're being told to like present something and then being given a budget. And when that happens, what happens is that it sometimes can feel like something's being taken away from you, because you see an institution that's like got a lot of money. They ask you, oh, can you do something in our parking lot, for example? And you're like, oh, what's something I could do in the parking lot? You come up with these big, huge ideas. You think of like an amazing, like shoot for the stars idea. And then they're like, well, actually, we only have $5,000. And you're like, and so it feels like something's being taken away from you. So then you desire making this thing you've pictured in your head, and you'll do anything to do it at that point. And now that they've seen that, they expect that from you. And so when you ask for budgets up front, it really just helps you to gauge what you can actually do with the cost of with what they have available. And if they say, well, we can't give you the budget yet, back off. Huge blaring red flag. Like I want when somebody says we can't tell you the budget, I want you to hear like fire alarms in your head. I want you to run in the other direction. It's like, because usually they should know. If they don't, and if they don't know, at least if they're willing to be transparent about the process. Like I've definitely been in situations where like there have been like, we don't really know how much we can spend, but can we like see what kind of work you do? And I'll just like send them images of the work that I do. And then they'll be like, oh, well, how much does it cost for that? That is fine. But asking you to propose something before there's a budget, no, because the cost of proposal also costs money. Organizations like AIPP, like Art in Public Places, they will pay you for proposing. They'll pay you for making that. So if an organization is one not willing to pay you for the proposal process, which is also not common, it's just usually a governmental institution thing. But if they're one not willing to pay you for the process and they're not willing to tell you how much they have available, you should feel a little bit leery of proceeding with them at the very least. And if you say, no, I can't do that, chances are they're going to reach out to you again because they wanted you to do it in the first place. Or and if they don't, they might reach out to somebody else who doesn't have the same chutzpah, I guess, to say no.
And I think beyond even just like, you know, asking for what you need budgetarily. And, you know, I think when we were developing this, we talked a lot about asking for deposits too, asking for contracts. Like you are the person that has to advocate for the things you need. But at this point, if someone approaches you with a project, this is also where you can set your timeline and you can tell them when something can get done realistically within your practice, knowing you have 6 other things going on, or you have a day job, or you're working nights. So when you get to the point of, you know, speaking to someone, don't feel uncomfortable asking the questions you need to get the clarity that you need to understand if this is something you can take on. Don't be afraid of deposits. I think, you know, Juan can probably talk about this and I can talk about this, but whenever we're working on a project, it's okay to get paid 50% upfront and 50% upon completion, or whatever that breakdown is. Every organization, you know, has different breakdowns of what they need, but it is kind of a gesture of like, we are committing to this. You have to protect yourself as an artist. And I know, you know, later on in skills, we'll talk about contracts and legal language, but make sure you're protecting yourself, your time, your investment, and your interests always. All right, pay attention to terms and conditions. So going a little bit deeper into what I was just saying. So one, make sure you have the time you need to do what you're seeking to do. It's also okay to go back to someone and say, hey, I'm already booked through 2022, but I'd be happy to prioritize this for 2023. I'm really interested. These are some of my initial ideas. I think speaking from an organizational standpoint and working in a variety of organizations, like it's nice to have a connection with an artist who's interested in developing something. And there's always, you know, the opportunity for flexibility to be advocated for on your behalf. So having an open line of communication with the person that you're working with in whatever project it is really important. Most projects and grants have terms and timelines, so make sure that when you're applying to them before you get the grant, you understand what that timeline is. If you're applying for a 1-year grant, but it's a 10-year project and they're expecting it to be done, that might not be the proper grant for your project unless you've had a conversation with that grant administrator saying, you know, that the deliverable could be a benchmark for the project rather than the fully completed project. So really understand what they're expecting at the end of the grant term. Work smart, not hard. I think, you know, that, and don't be afraid to outsource and collaborate are really important. Like as much as money is important, use the resources you have. Ask other artists if this is your first metal piece, who they're using, what companies they're using, how they're outsourcing. Try to use your time wisely and the community that you've built. And just again, like, are you ready to work on that proposed project right now? Does it move you closer to your goal? One thing I will say is it's never a good idea to apply for a grant just to get money, even if you're proposing a project that is not really in line with what you're interested in. I think that's something that we've all seen as artists, but also, you know, administering different types of grants. We don't necessarily want an artist just to produce a project just because they need 5K. Because if that project at the end of the day is not fulfilling their practice, not fulfilling them as a person in the world, then it's not really moving them closer to one of their goals on their list. So just be really cognizant and understanding what it is you're actually applying for and making sure that those are authentic matches for the project that you're working on. And then just some notes here. It's even if you're not making as much money holding on to every aspect of a project, you can save time and sanity, which I will bold, underline, and highlight sanity by working with others, collaborating, outsourcing, whether it be working with a fabricator or a friend who knows how to do what you need them to do faster, has the time to do it faster, and it takes a load off of you. Like, that is totally okay. Grant administrators think it's okay. Artists thinks it's okay. I know sometimes as artists, we really hold on to things that are near and dear to us, but you can really help yourself out and help your project sometimes even come out better by working with other people and outsourcing.
I think quality is a big part of that too. Like sometimes just like you might want to save money by doing it yourself or save money by like doing it some type of way. But if you put the money into it and you invest into your work appropriately, then more often than not, you'll have a better project, and then you'll have more opportunities following that as well. Don't be afraid to invest in yourself and your work.
Yeah. There's like a real obsession that artists have with being like the hand that made everything. But some of the biggest artists we know in history didn't make everything that they've sold. And recognizing that that's totally fine. You know, and also just like think about your health and your physical body. You know, you can't always make every single thing. And I definitely can attest to that. Like, your body can't always do everything. So ensuring that you're able to get the project done is like the key, right? And ensuring that you're also getting paid at the end of the day. So if that means outsourcing also just for time, do it. Like, it's great. Outsourcing is actually 10 out of 10 would recommend.
That's super fun.
So
labor broken down.
Yeah.
So basically just understanding the kind of different types of labor. There's more than physical and mental, of course, but just a little breakdown. Physically, you know, it's about the time that you put into the work. It's about the time going to get the materials. It's about actually seeing if it works the way that you thought it would work. Because a lot of the times you're making a piece and turns out it's not doing it the way that you wanted it to. And, you know, obviously, of course, communicating about the work and outreach about the work. That's something that a lot of folks kind of forget. After you make a work, there's still like a whole process that happens and trying to be exhibited and telling people that it's happening, because that's also laborious. And then, of course, you know, your time actually that goes into conceptualizing the pieces, into figuring out how it works, into writing about it, in conversation with your peers, people who do studio visits for hours, and then research and meetings. Another thing that people forget about sometimes is the amount of meetings they go in to exhibiting a work. Sometimes the three of us have definitely been in those with artists where it's like once a week, you know, just meeting to figure out how logistically something's going to go down, or you know, how it's gonna be exhibited, you know.
And we forgot to include this on the mental time list as well, but emails can get out of hand, and that is a huge mental time. But you know, we show you this in the sense of really understanding when you're proposing for grants or projects to consider both physical and mental time in your artist fee. You know, artist labor sometimes, like we said, can be outsourced, or you can work with collaborators, but the mental time is typically going to be tied to what you are asking for an artist fee to make this work or to make this project happen. So make sure, again, that you're considering both of these things, and all of this investment that goes into, you know, what it is you need, what it is your goals are, both for your life and your practice.
Yeah, and one of the things I do want to also say, like the reason we put physical time equals artist labor, mental time equals artist fee, is those are kind of the words you're going to see coming up when you're applying to things, or what you want to include when you like make a budget line item. So both, you should be like and it's funny because I feel like it seems silly to explain this, but you should be charging both a fee for your labor and for your fee. I know that like oftentimes you think, oh, I made this number, I'm fine with that. But you also have to consider that like if you were in certain situations going to be outsourcing it, that has a value to it. So if you are going to do that work, there's a value to it as well. So don't allow yourself to fall victim to not wanting to ask for payment for those parts of things. Because if you say, you know, if you can make a frame yourself, which power to any artist who knows how to make frames themselves, but if you could make your own frames versus paying someone to make those frames for you, the cost of the frame might be $500. Why is it that when it's yourself, you're going to charge $0 for that client or for that institution or for that grant? So that should have a labor and a number applied to it as well.
All right, community and collaboration, if we haven't already talked enough about this, but I would say that this is really a huge, huge, huge part of a hustle. You have to show up, you have to be immersed in what else is happening in your city or your town. You have to know the other people who are making the work. I really can't stress enough how much community, how much knowing other artists, being in conversation with them, popping into their studio for studio visits, going to talks and lectures, doing workshops, like it will amplify your reach. It will amplify everything that you are trying to do alone in your studio. Other ways that we've talked about, you know, community and collaboration. Say you're proposing a project and you want to work with a writer for the final form of the project. You guys can collaborate and trade. You don't always have to do everything yourself. There's tons of ways that these mutually beneficial relationships can benefit your practice and your project. Also, just having friends, like Juan said, it's super important. I think all three of us knew each other somehow from some other work we were doing. I went to high school with Juan, but I only then really got to know him at my previous job at Bakehouse because he was an artist and I was working. Same thing with Michelle. So I really can't stress enough how important it is to invest in, you know, these connections of community. And then also opportunity and resource sharing. I think that's something that's really starting to happen, at least in Miami now, is artists putting other artists' names out for opportunities. So the more people know about your practice and what you're working on, the more they can say your name to someone that's maybe not within your reach, and your name could be put up for a nomination or a grant or a public art project. So really having studio visits, talking, sharing what you're doing, whether it be on social media or during a happy hour or a casual run-in at an exhibition opening, talk about what you're doing. Let other people know what your interests are, what your goals are, because they can help. They can help you get there.
Yeah, and to speak to this a little bit more, I think that oftentimes you will find that somebody wants to just like meet up and like see your work, and they may not have like a show a show they want to put you in, or like a grant they want you to apply to, but they're really curious about your work and might just keep it in the back of their mind, and one day it just like pops up again. I've had I've had this happen a few times, but specifically I met somebody 4 or 5 years ago in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And just last year she curated my work into a show. So it took 4 years to see like the return on maintaining a relationship, and not to say the return, but you know what I mean, like a monetary or a work related return on those things. But it was beneficial. I had an amazing time being in that show. I got to go see that show, and those types of things happen a lot. And you're not going to build that particular kind of like natural community if you're not engaging in these like public spaces with people, or reaching out, asking questions, blind emailing people, just being like, I like your work, I'd really like to meet up with you, or I'd love to do a studio visit with you just to see. And we do studio visit kind of nebulous. Not everybody has a studio. Some people work from home. Maybe you meet up at a coffee shop and look over a laptop over a cup of coffee. Those are all acceptable ways to go about this,
I've also had conversations with Jermaine and Jen Clay about this is kind of like not as direct, but applying for grants, even if you know, maybe it's like way out, you think it's like way out of your league or like whatever it is, like it's also to remember that the people who are reviewing grants are curators and are artists and are people in the community, and they pay attention and they read. And so maybe you're not eligible, maybe you're not perfect for that specific thing, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to consider you or think about your work. And that's such applying for grants and for residencies and opportunities is such a great way of getting in front of those people.
That's, yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's a huge thing. People will, I've been on juries where I've seen something and like I'll remember that artist's work for a while afterwards. It may not mean that I immediately know what to do with them or what I want to do with them, but it's a really, really common thing that happens. Or oftentimes you'll apply to that grant and maybe you don't get that grant, but the institution or the group that puts on the grants might be like, oh, this person would be great for this other opportunity. And so you definitely should still be engaging and talking as much as possible. So this income survey. So we did this survey about artist income, and we originally had the intent of kind of going through the case studies a little bit more deeply, but it ended up being a little bit, it's hard the right word, it ended up being a little bit more nebulous than we wanted. And so I think instead we want to just kind of break down what responses from the responses we got. So just for context, within the responses that we're going to be kind of reading through, the average career length seemed to be around 11 to 20 years. But there was no one who was a new, super new artist. Most people have been working for some time. So we had 22.7% were 6 to 10 years, 31.8% have been working for over 20 years. So, and then in between that being 45.5. And then about half, it really came down to like a couple of people that skewed this, but most people are part-time, but there was still a significant number of full-time artists. So then we kind of asked people like, what ways do you fund your practice? Like, what does this actually look like? And so I put it in a way so that you can see like, what's the most common, what's the least common? And freelance work seemed to be across the board, full-time or part-time. People are like, we do freelance work all the time. And that's how we also add to our practice. Of course, adjunct teaching, especially for artists, is a pretty common thing as well. And then of course, full-time job, art sales. A lot of the other were things that were a lot more specific. People were like, I do translations for people. I write for publications. I do photography and things like that. And so the other was very, very full of different things that we didn't include in the actual survey. And then when we talked about artists who are more on the full-time side of things, a lot of people were doing prizes and commissions, which was not surprising to me at all. Prizes and commissions can really be like a big bulk, because with prizes and commissions, it's a big bulk sum of money that's just usually going to your practice. Commissions, obviously, because you're making something, it might break down a little bit tighter, but for the most part, when you do a commission, you have full control over your budget. And so usually that's a lot of artists will prefer to do commissions and prizes. And then of course, project grants, which, you know, those are a lot more specific usually. Talks and lectures are great if you're somebody who likes to do talks and lectures. I personally have been, I feel like I've gone on like circuits at this point of doing like talks and lectures, but those can actually be really great sums of money. And, you know, for me, I've been able to go to like Chattanooga, Tennessee. I've gone to like San Francisco and different cities to do those talks. And because I got to go to another city, I also got to engage with an artist community that I typically wouldn't speak to, which helped me add to my community. So I think that that's also really important. Workshops, super fun, especially when you do it with the kids. You get to like see their tiny hands try to make clay pots and do things like that. And they're usually like a decent sum of money also. And then public art projects. I separate those from commissions, because commissions are, I kind of want to consider those more of like on a private side. When it's a private funder, they're not asking for a budget, they're not asking for all that stuff. And that can be really helpful for people who just want to like make and see what happens. And then public art projects are a lot more specific. You have to work with like the city, and you have to work with like codes and stuff like that. And also, I actually, that didn't come up, but that's another thing I want to say is like, if you are doing public art projects with groups like this, you're going to have to consider the costs of things like coding and like making sure that things are, I say coding and like code enforcement, like not coding like a computer. So, but those are things you want to consider. And then, so this one, I unfortunately, I didn't realize how complicated it might look. So I'm gonna just move this over here. So this, on this side here, I put the breakdowns of like the percentage of your income that comes from your practice. And then this is how many people answered that. So if that's not clear. So it seemed like most artists are part-time artists at the moment, and most artists are not fully funding their practices, but it did feel a little bit, I guess, exciting to see that in the middle, we do have people who are fully funding their full practices from making this work. And because of that, I think that I just wanted to make it clear that that is a goal that is tangible. There are people who are doing it, if that's something you desire. I'm still trying to figure out if it's something I really, really want, or if I want to still keep doing this like arts admin stuff, because I love it so much. Like I love being able to share my resources and help artists with like applying for stuff and like doing these things and reading people's paperwork. So, you know, it is something that I think it can become a little bit more clear that this is possible. Oh, this way. So, and then here are some tips. I really liked doing the survey because it also helped had other artists encourage each other about their work. And so there's a few tips that were here. I'm going to pull some more tips from the survey and add them to the resource list. But somebody said, apply to all the grants and don't take it personally if you're rejected. And it speaks to what Wansi was talking about how like there's going to be points where a jury member might read your words in your question or your stuff and be like, this isn't right for this, but maybe later. But also it just helps to get you in the practice of writing these grants. If you did attend our How to Apply program last year, or our How to Apply program in 2020, or our Artist Toolbox program in 2021, you probably got a breakdown of all of this. And if you didn't attend that, I encourage you to look back at that too. But we really broke down like how to like get these descriptions written and all of that. So preparing yourself to apply to grants regularly and like constantly having that stuff available is always going to be helpful. And you never know which grant you're going to get. You know, like I almost got this little like $1,000 grant from the Austin Foundation because someone sent me a link and I was like, oh, this is cool. And in that moment, I just copy pasted this description I had been working on into the grant, which was a super simple grant. And I got it. It was really exciting. Always save money for taxes. I myself right now, I'm dealing with that right now. I mean, I saved the money, but I don't want to give it away now to the tax man. But you know, once you start doing a lot of these big commissions, because you're getting 1099s and not getting W-2s, they're not withholding taxes for you. So keeping track of your taxes within your budgets is really important. It is a little jarring to see that you owe the taxman $3,000 sometimes, but if you held the money aside, it doesn't bother you. Like it doesn't feel like something's being taken away from you. Being resourceful with your materials, choosing materials wisely. This is really what I think see it as. Like I saw an artist who on TikTok, actually, this girl who was like, I saw that Studio Ghibli uses these particular paints to make their stuff. And so I bought them, and she said she spent $1,000 on paint. But then she was like, I'm still learning how to paint. And I was like, no, don't spend $1,000 on paint when you're still learning how to paint. You're gonna waste so much money. Buy tempera if you need to while you're in the process of learning, or acrylic. They're super cheap, it doesn't cost you a lot of money. You don't always need the fanciest kind of wood or whatever. So just, you know, considering those things. And then another thought that is something that we've talked about a bit too, finding a day job that's not too taxing on your creative part of your work. So this is really like up to you on like what works for you. I find that my day job being in the arts contributes to my artistic practice a lot. I think about my umbrella project that I did with Oh Miami and Naja. That project I think was very much rooted in my care for community, and my arts admin practice is very similar. And so it felt like it kind of went hand in hand. But there's also jobs that you can do that pay you well that you don't have to take home with you. And that is also really helpful, to have a job that doesn't make you feel like, okay, well, it's 5 p.m. and I still feel like I'm like bogged down with my job. Whereas if it's at 5 p.m., sometimes you just want to like run away and go to your studio and make some stuff. And then this last one I really appreciate is very, very practical. And it's 2 spending accounts, one's personal, one for your practice, and paying yourself from the practice spending account. And some people do that as like a business account, but if you don't have like a proper business for your practice as an artist, it is important to like kind of separate money. I think that like that can get really, once you start to do a lot of commissions and things, it can get really hard to keep track of where money is. And so having a separate account is definitely something I can co-sign. And then our last page here is kind of like a mantra that we found, which I thought was kind of nice. And it's, I will be specific with my goals. And this is something to maybe just repeat to yourself. I will be specific with my goals. I will measure my success by creating practical milestones. I will ensure my milestones and goals are achievable within the timeline I set. I will work on goals that are relevant and aligned with my values and core beliefs. And I will set a workable timeline so I know when to check in with myself. I mean, that kind of like really sums up everything we've talked about when it comes to this practice and the idea of hustling. So at this point, I think it would be great to take some questions, but I think that I noticed that Wansi was answering some questions in the chat. So if there's any more questions, you can throw them in the Q&A. Now that the chat's really clear, you can also throw them in the chat if you prefer. But I'm just gonna scroll through to see if I missed anything. If you don't have studio. Yeah, so if anybody has any, I see a question in the Q&A. So this is from R.A. Temkin. As someone who works full-time job in a parallel to the arts, can you speak about your personal method to balance work, life, and artistic practice? Okay, so I think we maybe should each go through this because I think it's different for each person.
I think starting with the hardest question first.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that that's kind of what we've been talking about through this whole process too, is like, the truth is that balance is really up to each person. I've been a person that always has been able to work a lot. But now, as like with health things and like just aging, I'm recognizing that I've just been like powering through things that I shouldn't have been. So I'm kind of working backwards now to get myself to separate my time a little bit better. So for me, I keep my weekends completely for my art and spots here and there where I make time for it. But my weekdays, I try to just get myself to decompress after being in the office all day. And that is for me been the most like valuable. So then I can go to my studio at like, I mean, typically I do my studio now, but like I can go to my studio at 10 a.m. and just stay there for a while and like let myself like work through the day and then leave around the same time I typically would from the office. That's what works for me. Also, my practice isn't like, not to say it's not time consuming, but it doesn't need the same amount of like active time. It's like, you know, if I'm working on something that's dying, it's drying for a little bit. And, you know, I also edit images from home on my desktop as opposed to my laptop. So that is also time that's like at home, that's a little bit different. So for me, there's some passive time that helps me in my practice too, to balance between the two.
Amanda, how do you think about that? You don't have a physical studio right now, right?
No. Yeah, I mean, so there's a few different ways I think I've helped separate. So when I did have a studio, one thing I would do is like leave the workplace, go get a coffee, go get a beer, whatever it was, just to like leave that space and then have a break and then come back to the studio and be in a different mindset. I think it's really important to like give yourself some sort of divide because you are essentially thinking about not your work, but everyone else's work around you or projects. So that was one way I did it when I had a studio. I think now I do set aside like I've created kind of like routines. So I think I have like a calendar reminder every other day, studio time after work. Whether or not I get to do that every other day, it does remind me that like, okay, I haven't set aside time for me to work on a project. So let me research, let me read, let me do some writing on a grant that I have open, let me revisit my list. I also go for runs just to create like mental space and help with like mental health of really thinking about so many things during the day that can somewhat take up the space that you need to think about your own work. So sometimes I'll go for a quick run or I'll do a workout and then I can kind of get into it with like a clear head. So for me, I think it's been, without a studio, it's been a lot more like routine and keeping myself accountable with my time management. But luckily, you know, working in the arts, I'm exposed to so many different artist projects, doing exhibitions and grant management, that honestly, it's just super inspiring. Like, you know, I'll be at my desk reading someone's grant proposal and I'm like, damn, like I need to, you know, think about things in a different way. So I think that also helps push me into kind of meeting these like benchmarks in my routine or the time I've set aside for myself as well.
Yeah. I'm super undisciplined and like having like a steady practice. I have a calendar reminder on my phone that pops up every day at 6:30. This is just a studio, and like it's just something like, oh, like I should think about the studio. But I also purposefully leave things at my studio so that I have to go there, like if it's my computer or like whatever it is, you know, so that like I actually enter that physical space. That physical space for me has been absolutely essential in like actually having a practice. Because I mean, I think a lot of us here also do freelance work. So sometimes I'm actually working Monday through Sunday on like various projects. But when I go to the studio for something, it's like, okay, I'm here now. And then I look at a wall or I look at a project and I'm like, I should work on that. I should do that.
Yeah, I can speak to that too. Also, I think when COVID hit, and we were all working virtually and I had like just left my studio, one thing for me that I found really hard working in photography, which is often, you know, on a computer, was creating a separation of that workspace. So because my workspace became my laptop, I make a very clear distinction between my work laptop only having work stuff and my personal laptop having everything I needed as an artist, because I couldn't physically separate the space in reality for myself. So, you know, it meant that if I carried my personal laptop around, I was working on a project because I didn't have access to my work. I wasn't logged into email and stuff like that. So I think that there are, you know, a variety of creative ways. And I've also done that trick of leaving stuff in my studio too. So I understand that as well.
Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Michelle.
I'm muted. And also for those who maybe don't have that ability to like separate the two things, like on like a physical like object like that, it's like turning off notifications for certain apps while you're working, or I put my phone on do not disturb or my iPad on do not disturb. I FaceTime with my sister a lot and she'll FaceTime me in the middle of working on something and all of a sudden it's been 30 minutes, 45 minutes and I haven't been doing it. And she'll do that a lot when I'm in the studio. So like things like that can also be helpful. Oh, we have so many more questions. Okay, so any links to meetups or recommendations of places to meet other artists in Miami? So we mentioned like Bakehouse. There's also like, for me, I'll say like Ulite, obviously we work there. So like all the arts organizations, they do a lot of events from time to time. And now we're definitely slowly like going in person again. We have talks coming up this Wednesday. And there's always artists that attend our talks regularly. So that's like always a good way to start, because it's kind of like when you like go on a first date to a movie. So you like have something to talk about later. So like you can go see, you know, Amada speak, and then you can be like, oh, that thing she talked about at that point was really interesting. So you have something to like kind of break the ice and talk with people about. I know it sounds silly, but it is really helpful for people who aren't great at like introducing themselves to people. There's also like, we have art classes also. So if you're like interested in learning a new skill, there are classes at Ulite and Bakehouse. The individual artists at Bakehouse will do art classes, but at Ulite specifically, we have like our classes that we put on. And oftentimes that's really helpful too, because you're in a class with like other people who are interested in ceramics or interested in printmaking or whatever it is that you also do. And so that gives you kind of a starting point for the conversation and to see what kind of work they do. And you'll see exactly what they're working on. Trying to think, I was also, there's a ceramic studio up north. I can't remember what it's called, but that's also another, you know, maker spaces are great places to meet other artists. Because the truth is like also artists are always working.
in our resource list, I think we have provided a few places to kind of, not like maybe so physical, but places to actually get those resources as well. So definitely keep on the lookout for our resource list. We'll send that out after
And I'm
after
sure
this.
it'll grow and evolve too after this conversation. But yeah, to echo Michelle, I think if you're an artist trying to meet artists, like look up open studio events. There's a few arts organizations in Miami that have studio space for artists. I would say those are probably the best ways to see what other artists are doing, because you directly have access to see what they're working on, and it's an easy and casual way to spark up a conversation with them. And then probably 80% of the time they'll be like, oh yeah, I have the show opening. And you go to the show opening, your network expands, and vice versa.
So the next question, which is like it's a big question, is what are the benefits of creating an LLC to handle your artistic funds? Is it necessary?
Taxes.
So yeah, it's really taxes. So essentially, like your taxes will be slightly lower if you're an LLC versus like an individual person getting paid large sums of money. And we're going to be kind of vague because it is a very specific to you kind of situation. Some artists like are not doing a lot of monetary like exchanges with their practice. So like having an LLC versus not is not going to make much of a difference. But if you're doing like, essentially, if you're an artist who's like making, 25,000, 30,000, like those like numbers, which isn't actually that big over the year, but it is significant. You probably should have an LLC if you're making anything over like 10,000 a year on your practice. But the session with Alligators airs, we're going to talk a lot more in the technical terms about like LLCs, taxes, and things like that. And then we're going to go into a full tax session later on. But I would say for the most part, most artists probably should have an LLC. But it's like also 100% your choice. But it's a big tax problem. It's all about taxes in the government, really.
And I think that if you're not at the point where you feel like if you're ready for that yet, one thing you could do is just open up an account at a separate bank than your personal funds. And then you can honestly see in real time how much money your art practice is bringing in, because those statements will only be related to your practice. So maybe that's kind of an entry point before you're ready to like invest in an LLC. But I think a separate account could be the starting of that.
I'll also say like don't be intimidated by it. Like it's really not expensive to do. It's like $175 I think to register an LLC. I did it way before I was making money because then I was set up. I had the infrastructure to grow already, and it wasn't going to be difficult. And so don't be intimidated by it. I recommend that everybody does it because it's not going to hurt you, and it's just going to make things a lot easier and more organized for you. So yeah, don't be afraid. Go for it.
So we got a question from Eliza that says, can you speak about the value of rest, or essentially like how time for rest is part of cultivating a sustainable artistic practice?
Yeah. I think rest is, and maybe we should have put it as the highest priority, but it honestly is the highest priority. I think, especially if you're balancing, various freelance work or a full-time job and freelance work and being an artist, like nothing good will get done if you're extremely burnt out and frustrated. You don't have a clear mind to write. You don't have a clear mind to work in the studio. You'll make mistakes. You'll waste resources. Rest is super important. For me, when COVID hit, I invested in a Fitbit because I was like, running is going to be my mental break. And, it reminds me every night when it's time to go to bed. And it's like a beautiful thing that you need that reminder. But honestly, it really is so important to get, rest, whether that be physical sleep or just time to sit and not have your mind going, and just take a break, read something completely different, separate yourself, whatever rest is for you. I think it's really important to invest in that.
Yeah. Essential.
Yeah. I mean, you can't really do anything if you're not rested enough. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be productive at all. And it's like I included a couple meditation apps in the resource list. Meditating is really great. It's really helpful. Reading also is like a great way to like slow down, but also like you can read something that helps you like contribute to your practice. So if you're a person who's a big avid reader, finding like good books that contribute to your practice, but also give you a second to stop, that's also really helpful in like finding a way to rest that's balanced.
Yeah, it's also like healthy to have just multiple ways of showing yourself love. you know, and like some people's artistic practice is like an expression of their care, you know, but it's also important to just have like different ways in which you tend to yourself and you care for your body, for your mind, for your spirit. And to just, I don't know, it sounds kind of woo, but like it is really essential.
Yeah. So Amanda Keeley, can you provide examples of Miami-based artists that maintain a studio practice is sustainable and works with the examples you have provided? So, I mean, this is on a personal thing. I just don't, I don't know if, I guess I don't feel comfortable being like calling these particular people out because it's kind of like their world, but there are definitely artists I can think of that do that. That's why we did the survey anonymously. So we actually made it completely anonymous so that we didn't, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of people are very private about finances, and I don't want anyone to ever feel like we're like putting their business in the world. But I can definitely like ask if it's something that, because like I'm wondering maybe why you pose this question, and if it's something that maybe you want to just like talk to that artist, I can reach out to some of the artists that I know and see if they're comfortable with like speaking with you directly. But I just don't want to be like, these people are, you know, like it just feels like not my business to share kind of in that way. Like, yeah. So it's just like a thing on me. If you guys want to talk about it on your own, like
Yeah,
your own
I mean, I
kinds of
agree.
things in life,
I
but
think, yeah, I think we're not necessarily going to name people in our presentation without their permission, but I will say that, you know, when we put together what we would talk about, it was with Miami in mind as a city, knowing our peers and knowing different people that we've worked with over, you know, the course of our careers in the arts, but also as artists in the city. So there's definitely plenty of artists in Miami that are doing it. I'm sure there's plenty of artists in every city and place that people are tuning in from, maybe in different formats, because you know what they have access to funding wise is different. But yeah, it's definitely feasible here in Miami.
yeah. Oh, somebody asked where the resource list is. I'll share it again. I'll share the link again. And then our last question is best way to find grants and match your practice. So in the resource list, we do have a list of orgs, but we can also speak to it a little bit. Like what I like to do is I'll go to like Cafe or Submittable, or I say Cafe, call for entry. I call it Cafe because it's the acronym. I think you're supposed to, but I'll go to like call for entry, Submittable, and I will specifically just put in like textiles, fibers, photography. Like I'll search just the word and see what kinds of grants come up. And then I'll specify, because like also the nice thing about particularly call for entries is actually a little bit better. The website doesn't look that great sometimes, but it's a little bit better on letting you be specific. So you can say like only calls that are free. You can say that you only want to apply to things that are either regional, national, or international, or you can say all of them. Then you can choose if you want grants or residencies, or if you want, you know, prizes. And then that's how I kind of tried to like search through those websites. And that's usually helpful. Or sometimes I'll just Google. I'll just be like, because some stuff's not on those websites. Some organizations are like newer and smaller and they like don't really know where to put their calls. So sometimes they'll just find it in the world, like in the ether. NIFA is also a great resource. It's usually artists in New York. So if you're not in New York, it might not be something that's right for you, but there are still a lot of calls that are international and national on NIFA as well. So, oh no need to apologize, Amanda. I just like, we're like, I think it's hard, you know, we work for an organization that's very public facing, and I don't ever want anyone to feel like they are like being called out, I guess, maybe, or like put in like a weird position. And so being that like, you know, we had like 80 RSVPs for today. So like, I just didn't want to like be like, here, all these people, bombard them.
Yeah.
So we have 2 more questions. Okay. Oh, did anybody want to speak more to like the picking specific calls? Sorry.
I mean, I'll say that like a lot of times it starts with Google. I know that I follow or are members of like, you know, certain newsletters that are specific to photography grants for like longer term projects. So those I think often you'll find on a more international level because the funders are all over depending on the type of foundation or funding. I'm sure Juan can speak a little bit to film, and I think it probably works similarly. But I would say don't only look, you know, locally. I think that if you do a wider search on Google, oftentimes you'll like get master list of photo grants that will fund your like, you know what I mean? You'll find these weird kind of websites that will give you like this master list of all the organizations and all the funders that someone's compiled that will fund the type of project you're looking for. So it just takes a little bit of time and research. But also ask friends that are working in the same field. I think I've even asked Michelle before, like, hey, how did you do this? Or what did this grant do for your project? Ask for their opinions. Sometimes they might have found something that worked for them that, you know, might work for something you're thinking of if it's a similar project or a similar kind of timeline.
Yeah, for sure. So what's that?
No, I was gonna go into Amber's question because I think this is a really cool one.
Oh yeah, I was reading that too.
Out of curiosity, when picking freelance work, especially when working on multiple projects, do you strategically pick projects to work on at a time? I do a ton of freelance work. I specifically work with artists and arts nonprofits. And that's really because I don't want to be making work or doing freelance work for, I don't know, restaurants or businesses that don't pertain to me. Because also when I pick these artists and these arts organizations, I'm actively connecting myself further into the community, and I'm able to spend more time with some people. I do, and it wasn't specific, I do like video work. So I'll like film somebody, like a short documentary on somebody, or documenting somebody's artwork and process, things like that. So that gets me like super involved and super connected with my peers that I wouldn't have the opportunity to know before.
Yeah, and it's really good. I pulled back personally a lot on doing freelance work in recent years, just for like my own personal reasons. But when I would do freelance work, I actually did the opposite. I would do stuff that was completely outside of me. So I'd do like corporate portraits and stuff like that. Like it let me kind of like be disconnected for a second. So just like photograph, or like I do like family portraits and like things like that. But I was strategic in choosing those things because of what I needed, like on a mental health side of things. And I also would pick things that allowed me to work on the weekends. And so I could sub in for like some of my studio time to do that thing instead, because that was like on a personal choice.
Yeah, I would say similarly to Juan, I'm specific about working with, you know, artists and arts organizations. I think my focus recently has been working with people who work on like a national or international level, because that's something that's out of my day-to-day reach, and it allows me to really build community outside of Miami and kind of grow in the sense of learning what other cities are doing or other countries are doing. So I think it is important to, you know, again, ask yourself, is this something that's contributing to your goal or a need? And yeah.
So Norwood Creech in Memphis said, do you have opinions on the academic process, MA, MFA, PhD, etc.? How do letters affect work, community appearance, acceptance, etc.? It's an interesting thought. Like, I think the arts is actually surprisingly open about like what access points you have. I think that especially now, people are not so committed to like the do you have an MFA type of like conversation. I personally don't. Like, I have a BFA. I consider getting an MFA. My long-term goal is to have a PhD because I love academia, but it's not like, it hasn't hindered me in my practice personally. And I don't know other people who maybe have seen the hindrance. I think the biggest hindrance you'll see is in situations where maybe you're looking for certain kinds of full-time jobs in the arts, but that's still not that common, because oftentimes the equivalence of the experience is also considered when you're applying for certain jobs. And then, in the arts, in the field, I will say, as a person who's experienced it and also juried a lot of things and read through a lot of applications, the work is kind of like the pinnacle. Like, the work is what we really needs to stand out and be really great. The writing should supplement, like how you can write about your work should supplement it, but the CV and like the letters and the numbers and dates on your CV are usually not make or break for your work. And I can say that from my personal experience, but also definitely from jurying however number of like prizes and awards I've gotten to jury over the years, that I don't see anybody being like, well, these people are equal in what or how much we like their work, but this person has an MFA. You know, it's like, because like actually, if we think about it that way, we make academia like up in that way. You'd think actually the person with the MFA should be making better work, right? Like if we're going to think about it that way, I don't think about it that way for context, but I'm just like, you know, if we're going to treat the MFA as like above the other things, then we have to also think about that. So I don't think it's typically used that way personally. Does anybody else have any, want to expand on that a little?
Yeah, I also don't have an MFA. I was really adamant about working through my BFA with different organizations to get experience working in arts admin and with artists in different projects. So I think it's a balance. I think I would say if you're considering an MFA, make sure you're going because there's something else you want to learn and it's not just to continue what you're doing. I think for me, like the reason why I didn't go get an MFA right away was I wanted to kind of figure out my voice and what it was I was actually doing and what it meant to the world and or the community before saying that I wanted to continue doing it. So I think that, you know, when I graduated, I thought I would have gotten an MFA in something that now, if I think about getting an MFA, it would be in something completely different. So, you know, life experience and just like making the work and failing at the work and not getting the grants, like it helps so much in you really discovering like what are the gaps and what learning experience could benefit you and your practice, you know, to get it a little bit further. But I agree with Michelle on the sense of like weight that might carry on a CV. We really are always looking at work and writing and before we look at pedigree, I guess.
Yeah. And you know, to speak to what you were just saying, like I did a master's, like a certificate program with Johns Hopkins a few years ago. And I graduated from my BFA in 2014. So I definitely have not jumped straight back into academia either. But I found that there was a clear sign between those who had just finished undergrad 5 minutes ago and those who had taken time. And there was like a maturity in like what they were prepared to do, how you're able to respond and things of that sort. So it's definitely like not make or break. And whenever you want to do the MFA, you don't have to do it tomorrow. You can do it whenever you're ready. And I think this will be our last question that we'll take because we're actually like just about at 12, almost 12:30. Do you think it's possible to find temporary jobs in the States, arts in the States, and ways to connect or approach the organizations? So the best time is during fairs to get temporary work. I don't know what you, I guess, are like what specifically you desire. If there's like a specific time of year you want to come, you can always do a job that you don't stay at for a long period of time. But I would say if you want to, it really depends on what you're desiring to get out of the job. Like, are you wanting to just be here for a short period of time, like when you're like, say, doing as a residency or something? Or is this something that you're kind of trying to dip your toes into being in the US or into being in the States? It really depends on what you're desiring. There's lots of temporary jobs everywhere. It depends on what kinds of jobs you want also. And then and how to connect organizations. I would say connecting to organizations, looking at the websites we talked about, like jobs that are NIFA and those places to see. They will also put like if the job is temporary or long-term as well. There's lots of like, in the arts especially, there's lots of like temporary exhibitions coordinator or like temporary gallery assistant, temporary things like that. And if that's something that you'd be interested in, those things are always available. But honestly, it's just reaching out, emailing. The unfortunate thing is if you're not in the same country, you're gonna have to kind of depend on phone calls and emails, and that's like can be kind of hard. It's also nice to like meet people when you do get a chance to visit and like introducing yourself in that way. But I know that that's kind of like a very high pressure situation for people too.
I think also another route. Yeah, I think also another route for like temporary work Two could just be like apprenticing for an artist or studio assisting for an artist who might be working on a big project. And it could be someone that you follow, you're really interested in their work. That might be one way. They might be tied to an organization via their studio space. So that automatically kind of gives you access to learning about different organizations. I think reaching out to organizations for a tour, whether it be of an exhibition or of their studios, or, oh, I'm going to be in town. Like, I mean, every organization I've worked in, we've always given tours to people who, you know, have sent an email and requested it. So, I mean, don't be afraid to email, don't be afraid to call and reach out. Understand that you might not get a response immediately, but it's definitely something that organizations in the States, I guess, are, you know, open to doing. But yeah, maybe look at some of the artists that you've been following over here and see if any of them are working on a big projects. Shoot them an email, say, I've been a fan of your work, happy to assist. These are my skills. I know a bunch of artists that I've worked with get solicited that all the time. And a lot of times their studio assistants and interns come out of those emails. So it's definitely feasible.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think this is a good time to wrap. We're at exactly 12:30. So that means that we ran out through our course of time. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Wansi and Amanda, for participating in this with me. If I missed any questions, I always download the chat afterwards, so we can answer via email if there's anything that we may have missed. And again, thank you all for attending, and feel free to RSVP to the other sessions. They are all available on uletarts.org. So bye.
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 See ya.